Hello, I'm Nicholas, and today I'm going to talk about a human designed for observing. Let's start with how would a person designed for observation, how would they live? So, I believe that a person designed for observing would have keen senses, keener than ours, and that they would have an ability to survive in adverse circumstances, so they would not have to depend on other creatures for their survival. I'm imagining that these people would actually live as solitary beings for their lives, and that they would exist to observe nature. So, such a human being would be designed to be able to live on everything around themselves. When it comes to human beings, we spend a lot of energy on our brains, and we spend a decent amount of energy to move, but mostly to warm ourselves and to power our brains. So, for a creature designed for observing, a human being designed for observing, their brain, especially if they are not social creatures, their brain could probably be smaller, especially in the parts which are responsible for social behavior. At the same time, it would be very interesting if those human creatures had a sense to be able to show what they've observed to other creatures in some form. So they must still be able to communicate. They would be able to communicate in the same way as people communicate. So, for example, they would be able to speak in the broadest sense of that idea. They would be able to use body language to communicate what they're thinking. And I imagine that that would be the primary ways they communicate, just as humans. They could also interact, they could touch something. Such a being would be able to not threaten other beings. So how would a human designed for observation eat? Like, how would they consume food to be able to have enough to power their brains without imposing upon other beings? So without doing agriculture, and without causing other beings to be afraid of it. So without hunting regularly enough for animals to feel that those human-like humans would actually be a danger. So one thing I'd imagine would be that they would eat very infrequently. So just like a crocodile, they would eat every once in a while, a large amount, and then they wouldn't eat. And their brains would work in such a way as to desire the largest complexity of the largest variety of foods possible. So they would want a plant one day. They would eat they could eat ferns, for a little bit, and then they would eat something more nutritious like a nut. And then once in a blue moon, they'll eat a colony of ants and maybe even a larger creature in a very rare instance. And so they would just eat a very wide variety of creatures. So that way, no single plant or animal would defend itself specifically against this creature. I will start describing this being from the top downwards. Let's start with the brain. The brain will be smaller. The skull will be elongated down close to where the bottom of the neck is. So the neck will be short, but the skull will be long. The jaw, which goes upwards in each person, will go first down and then back up. The reason for that arrangement would be to allow for very, very large cheeks. These large cheeks and extended skull shape and large jaw will allow for a large opening for food to enter into this human creature. The reason the human creature needs a large jaw and a large mouth is because in order not to threaten creatures, it will eat a wide variety of different creatures at very long intervals. So by avoiding eating a creature over and over, it will just eat a lot of something at one point, and then it might not eat the same thing for, another 10 years or something. So that's why it needs a large mouth, to be able to fill itself up pretty quickly. The result of this extremely long skull will be that the place where the vertebrae connect to the skull will be squished together, and right at the bottom, still allowing a large degree of flexibility, but with minimal length. The length will actually be given by the back of the skull and the place where the jaw connects up to the joint of the jaw being moved way downwards so that the mouth can open out forwards like that to be able to accept more in one sitting. Now, the eyes can be large, but if they're too large and see images that are too detailed, they will consume more energy than eyes that are smaller. So there's obviously a balance. But since this organism is designed for observing, the eyes should be medium-sized. They should be larger than a human's eyes, but maybe by 1.5 times, not like a lot larger, because the more energy this organism would have to consume, the more energy it has to consume, the more it has to hunt, and the more of a threat it is to other beings, so it can't observe other beings doing what they're doing as well. This being will also have, we're going from the top down. This being will also have larger ears, of course, to be able to funnel in more sound, but not too large. And unlike a human's ear, which easily gets cold because it's disconnected from the rest of the human head, at least this outer part is, right? It will be connected. This whole skin will be connected inwards like that, and will actually, the skull might be recessed a little bit to allow the ear to stay flush. This is to allow less heat dissipation when it's swimming and less drag when it's swimming. Because the idea is that if this creature eats very rarely in very, very large quantities, so like you imagine that like the head, the neck, the skull with its jaws like 1/4 of the height of the body, so like that tall, right? So can eat like its own body's massive food, and then obviously can't stand when it eats that much, so it has to lay down and maybe crawl over to a body of water and just float there and maybe swim around, so it would have webbing down part of the way down the fingers, right, to allow it to swim. Gotta get sidetracked easily. Here we go. For being able to touch things and taste things, it would have very long and skinny mouth, skinny tongue, like an anteater's. So just imagine human tongue like little and very long, so that it can taste different things, because it's an organism for observation, right? So it can hear well, it can taste well, and it's also important for it to have a long and strong tongue to be able to manipulate food inside its giant cheeks, to be able to move it up to where move it down to where the molars are, and to be able to process it that way. Also, this organism would have, as a result of the long neck, but to its own benefit, it would have a very long nasal passage. A long nasal passage to allow external heat, the hot air that it breathes out, to be absorbed into the nose, and then to be, when it breathes back in, for that warmth go back into the air, to be able to recuperate warmth when it's in a cold environment. And so that would be facilitated. You know, like a reindeer has these interesting spiral shapes. Maybe it won't have spiral shapes, but just because of the length of the nasal tract and a large nose will facilitate that, for it to be able to exist in colder climates. I mean, when it comes to warmer climates, it would still be able to sweat, but to keep itself warm, it wouldn't have hair on the head, because it wouldn't be able to cut that, and it would add unnecessary drag when swimming. But to keep itself warm, it would have hair starting from around where the very like flabby cheeks, where the cheeks are, going downwards along the whole of its body. And these long hairs would insulate its body in cold temperature, and would just grow hair all over its body. But when it ate a lot and it's gaining weight, and then it swims around because it can't stand for a while, in that time period, maybe to facilitate swimming, or if it's exceptionally hot, it would just nibble away with its long neck. You'd imagine it would go down, and it would stretch its skin and something, and it would just nibble away all of the excess hair when it doesn't need the hair, and then slowly it would grow back. As for the rib cage, this creature would have a similar rib cage to ours, maybe a larger lung capacity, for it to be able to survive better when it's in the water, and just in general, for it to be able to breathe. It would have lungs just like us, but for its defense, it would have, in case some other creature gets angry at it and wants to destroy it somehow, it would have quite thick skin in comparison to us, and this skin would add protection. But on top of that, I was thinking that maybe our rib cage bones, well, they already get quite close together. Maybe it would have rib cage bones and some other bones, like I'm imagining the leg bone to somehow have like a part that comes out and forms like almost like an exoskeletal structure, but like underneath the skin, some additional like reinforcement, some bone, extra skin, cartilage, and that kind of thing in certain areas, so that when it is threatened, when it is in danger, it can curl up into a little ball. For its hands, one of the fingers would be very long and skinny, so that it could touch in areas that are difficult to get to otherwise, just like that one kind of lemur. It would have that thin finger. It could go in and touch whatever it wants to touch because it's observing all the time. Its arms would be proportional, kind of like a human's. Just in general, this creature would be tall, but designed to be very lightweight, to minimize the energetic cost of walking on land. And this would mean that it would probably not be a fast creature, but it wouldn't need to be. And also, with its tall head, it would be able to see very far away, but also because of the small brains, it could probably insert its head to look inside places that are otherwise difficult to look at. To express itself to others, to humans primarily, but to other beings, it would do that in various ways. It could mimic what other sounds it heard. It could also sculpt, it could shape matter, potentially, into different shapes, and even like make drawings, kind of representations of what it sees in its dreams. But then it would also be able to gain lots of weight in rare circumstances, to be able to go for long periods of time just wandering and observing different areas. It could also use its mouth. I was thinking, because of how large its mouth would be, I could imagine that if it saw some creature being abused or hurt in some way by some other creature, it might go out of the way and just like put it into its mouth and wait for the danger to pass, and then poof, release it. Hip bones would be similar to ours, just because it's designed to be like evolutioned from a human being, right? Bioengineered human of the future, designed to observe. Legs would be especially long, exactly for that energetic efficiency. And its toes, and its hands also, but its toes would also have webbing in between the toes, and one of the fingers, just like on the hands, would be made to kind of curl up maybe have thick skin on parts of it that could receive abrasion from the floor and so on. But it would also be able to touch things that are difficult that are small or something, without it having to bend over, because that spends energy. Also, even though its brain would be smaller, it would still have a relatively large brain. And so it probably couldn't hibernate for that reason. As for the colors of the skin, I'm imagining that they would just naturally vary, like in humans, to all shades. And in terms of the specific morphology of the face and of different parts of the creature, they could be varying to some degree, but in general, those distorted proportions would stay true. Oh, it's procreation. How would this being produce more of itself? I'm imagining that it would be just like a person's, where they'd find one another, and there wouldn't be very many of these, but they would find each other attractive, presumably, and then they'd go through some kind of a ritual. But ideally, it would be very gentle, and they would not produce many of themselves, just because they're meant to observe and not to take over the environment as like a staple species. I'm also imagining that with them being able to protect other beings in their mouth, in their large mouths, that it would be fairly normal for them to take care of their young by taking them and putting them in their giant cheeks and just keeping them there until they are large enough to be able to handle otherwise. Yeah.
I believe that people are not necessary to modify. There is no need for additional human exploitation of natural places. People who are designed to live in nature already exist. These are human beings, as we know them, and they're supposed to live in groups, and they are not supposed to exist to observe simply, but also to interact and to speak of what they have seen. And this social interaction and our ability to make tools will allow us to see better than a human designed to observe could ever see. I believe that people should not modify genetics. Even with breeding, we have made many animals live painful existences. This creature, with its strange proportions, strange diet that is very different from how a person would live, its existence out in the open, its giant jaw and cheeks, and all of these things would probably make its existence much more painful than ours. Also, the long-term consequences of our actions in modifying genetics are already proving to be complicated with our modifying of domesticated plants. Society should slow down. We should put less stress on us in terms of working to achieve these supposedly necessary achievements, and less stress on the rest of the natural world. If we did less, then the world would be less stressed. Animals are not objects or machines. Animals should not be treated as such. I have called this speculative being it in this video. It is a reflection of my problematic view of biology as a mechanism, as a machine. Biology is not a machine. Biology, every being that exists is making its own choices and is selecting it itself as it wishes. So by genetic modification and forced breeding, we are removing agency from the animal or plant that we modify. I made a drawing instead of making a giant metal sculpture. I do not need to use the world's resources to make a large metal sculpture of this being. I believe that drawing is far more effective at communicating my idea. It has less of an ecological impact, and as large metal sculptures are traditionally a tool used to glorify what we value, I have avoided making a giant metal sculpture because I am choosing to avoid the glorification of a popular science fiction narrative of human conquering of nature, of biology, and of matter and the whole world itself.
The talk about the creativity of other beings and our elevating ability to control genetics makes me wonder about creating a situation where the human has been changed to be difficult to distinguish in between an animal and a human, where this kind of distinction is difficult to make. And so I made this being basically act like an animal and yet have a form like a human, but still have some of that human element. So kind of like in imagining this being, you would be forced to think about the more than human. So this article or this paper found that brain volume is correlated to some degree with social network size. So this helped inform the shape of the brain of this human-like that had been designed to exist without a social network at all. As I also researched how to make a heat exchanger for a human being that would reduce the coldness of incoming air by preheating it with outgoing air for use in cold temperatures and to save heat energy that the body produces, I wondered if an organism exists that already does that, and it turned out that reindeers do it. So I designed this human like to have reindeer like nasal capacity. I considered having this being be able to hibernate, but it turned out that having a fairly large brain prevented that from being a likely possibility. They recount the stories of human beings raised by animals. I was inspired by this to create an imagining of a human being that
was designed for observation, that was solitary, and that was only raised as much as is strictly necessary by their parent and left to live out in the wild a solitary lifestyle, completely unlike the way a human lives today. I designed a tall person that was designed to be very lightweight because short people tend to weigh less and tend to use less energy, and tall people tend to be more mechanically efficient, according to this. Find his ideas on gender very interesting, especially on how certain traits would be inherent to a certain being, but then also there being cultures. So I thought about what what would the traits of a being whose culture is just observing, and so this got me thinking into what traits they would have. How would they what traits would they have to observe better, to feel subtle textures? How would their body be shaped, and how would they love each other, and how would their lifestyles be?